Well, good evening to everyone who is logged in so far. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Whether you're a longstanding client, a newer member of the Vantage Point family, or someone joining us for the very first time, we are honestly so honored that you're here. So thank you. I'm Tim Kuntz, co-founder of Vantage Point Financial, along with Nick Ryland. Nick and I are here on behalf of our Chicago office community. Also joining us tonight is Jeremy Ryland, president of our St. Louis office. Jeremy, I'd love to pass you the mic so you can welcome your clients.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Just want to welcome everybody that works with the St. Louis office, all of our wonderful clients, all of our team members, family and friends that have joined us. I'm really excited to hear what Dr. Crosby has to share with all of you. So I've had the luxury of getting to know him over the last couple of years, and he is one of the great minds in finance. So it's not going to be the boring finance stuff. It's going to be the fun stuff tonight. So, and Daniel, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, and also want to extend a warm welcome to teammates, clients, and community from our Detroit Metro office run by Ron and Jeff Braun. Thank you guys for being here tonight. We appreciate you. At Vantage Point Financial, everything we do here truly centers around your life, not just your money, just like Jeremy said. Tonight's event is one of the many ways we plan to show you how we live that out. For those of you who do not know us yet, allow me to take a moment just to share a little bit about who we are and why events like this are so important to us. Vantage Point is a firm founded on a very simple belief that financial planning should be comprehensive, personal, and importantly, very deeply intentional. We're here to partner with you to lead you through the financial decisions that affect the most meaningful parts of your life, your purpose, your time, your health, your family, and importantly, your legacy. We've built our firm, Vantage Point Financial, to challenge the status quo of the financial services industry. Too often, we find that people are given fragmented advice, transactional service, and an impersonal approach to their financial plan. And honestly, we believe you deserve more. That's why we created the Elevator Retirement Plan, which is one of our proprietary planning processes designed to integrate 6 very crucial areas of your life: your goals and concerns, your income strategy, investments, taxes, insurance, and estate planning. What we found over the years is it's so much more than just managing your wealth. It's really about elevating your entire life. Because your finances don't exist in a vacuum, we believe deeply in education, community, and emotional wellness as important parts of this process too. And that is why we host events like tonight's. Financial decisions aren't just math, they're emotion, mindset, fear, and hope all rolled into one. We really want to meet you where life actually happens, and that means going beyond spreadsheets. Nick?
Yeah, which brings us to tonight's guest. We are truly excited and incredibly grateful to welcome Dr. Daniel Crosby. We've had the pleasure of seeing Daniel speak in person and even had the chance to meet his lovely family. He's every bit as insightful and engaging in person as he is through his writing. Dr. Crosby is a psychologist and a globally recognized expert in behavioral finance. He's made it his life's work to understand how our minds and emotions affect the way we make decisions about money and how we can improve those decisions to lead more meaningful lives. Hopefully, you're already seeing why his work is so meaningful to us in our pursuit of elevating our clients' lives. He's the author of several acclaimed books, including Personal Benchmark, a New York Times bestseller, The Laws of Wealth, named the best investment book of the year by Axiom and translated into 17 languages, The Behavioral Investor, a deep dive into the psychology, neurology, and physiology behind sound financial decisions, and his most recent work, The Soul of Wealth, which explores the intersection of money and purpose. Published just last fall, it's already been translated into 5 languages. Outside of his professional accolades, Daniel is a father of 3, an avid St. Louis Cardinals fan, not a Cubs fan, but maybe we can convert him one of these days. He's an explorer of the American South, and as we've learned, an amateur hot sauce chef. His unique blend of humor, research, and humanity makes him a truly special voice in the financial world. At Vantage Point, we believe your money should be in service to your life, not the other way around. And we believe that peace of mind around money starts with understanding not just the math and science, but the emotion behind it. Tonight is one of those rare opportunities to step back, breathe, and explore those deeper truths. We're so glad you're here to share it with us. So with that, please help me welcome Dr. Daniel Crosby.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I think it will become immediately apparent to everyone how perfect a fit some of my research is with the whole Vantage Point philosophy. It's been my pleasure to get to know these folks over the last few years. I don't do after hours engagements for just anyone, and I certainly don't do it for Cubs fans unless they are very, very good people. So it's a joy to be with you all tonight. And I look forward to sharing with you the research from my newest book, The Soul of Wealth. It must be said from the outset, my friends, that I was not a very good high school student. I was quite a bad high school student, in fact, but there was one piece of literature that I remember sticking out to me at the time I read it, and it was from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And you all probably read this at some point in your life, and you know the famous line, "Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink." And he shares the excruciating story of being adrift at sea, surrounded by water, and so thirsty. To be surrounded by water, but to not be able to make that water serve its intended use, struck me even at that young age as this agonizing thing. And I want to talk to you about the state of wealth in our nation today, because we are surrounded by wealth as a nation, but we, like the ancient mariner, have done a very poor job of taking that wealth and fitting it for our lives and our needs. The statistic that led me to write this book, because books are very hard to write and they pay very poorly. So if you're going to write a book, you have to really have a burning desire. And in my case, the burning desire, the flame for this book was lit by a single statistic. Now, we Americans are going to turn 250 this year. My goodness, it's January. So this year, we're having a big birthday this year. And we'll turn 250 this year. So 250 years ago, when this great nation was founded, around the world, 88% of people were living in poverty. So that would be $2 or less per day in today's dollars. I want you to think about that. Nearly 90% of the people in the world were living on what would now be $2 or less a day. Can't even get a coffee for $2 now, right? Almost everyone everywhere was living in backbreaking poverty. And over the last 250 years, we're now at a place where globally poverty is under 9%, which is still, 8.5% too high. But we have had this, because of the explosion of democracy and the explosion of capitalism, we have had this enormous growth in wealth. But over that same 250 years, we are seeing higher than ever levels of depression, anxiety, loneliness, disconnection, all sorts of bad societal outcomes. We are surrounded by wealth at a level that is unprecedented in human history, and yet we have not done a good job of turning that material wealth into personal wealth. So the book that I wrote, The Soul of Wealth, is about how to do that very thing. And the book is laid out in an interesting, I hope it's interesting way. It's almost written like little devotionals. It's breaks down in 50 chapters that are about 4 to 6 pages apiece. And each chapter starts with some historical anecdote, then talks about some research, and then talks about application for your life. So I want to share a few of these stories from the book tonight. And the first that I want to share is the story of Alexander the Great. If we look at the traditional trappings of wealth and power, nobody except maybe Genghis Khan did it bigger than Alexander the Great. By most accounts, the second richest person to ever have lived. The man was handsome, he was rich, he waged war for well over a decade without a single loss. I mean, by any measure of wealth and power and success, he was there. But he died at a very young age, and he was undone. This grand, this powerful, this visionary man was undone by something very human. He lost his best friend in war, and this led him to sort of unravel and begin to make a bunch of poor decisions that eventually led to his early passing. So we see again in the research that many of us turn to wealth and power and prestige as this buffet, as this shield against the pains of life. But when we look at what people really value, when life's true purpose is made manifest, we can learn a lot with people who don't from people who don't have a lot of time left. So Bronnie Ware is a palliative care nurse who sits with people who have a month or less to live, and she interviews them and asks them, when you look back at your life, what do you wish you had done differently? And my friends, wealth and money comes up once and only in the negative. They wish they hadn't worked so hard, and they wish they hadn't worried so much about money. When all of life is brought into such clear relief, we put money in a very particular spot, and most of us have spent too much of our time thinking about it, hoarding it, and worrying about it. So if being rich and powerful isn't the purpose of life, well, what can psychology tell us about what the purpose of life might be? At the risk of sounding vain, this is not my work. This is the work of Dr. Martin Seligman. But if you want to take notes or take a screenshot of just one part of our presentation, I feel like this slide is worth hanging on to. This is really the secret to a happy life. There's 5 things in the psychological literature that we see are indicative of someone who has a happy life, and it spells out, the acronym is PERMA. The P in PERMA is for positive emotion or fun. This is driving a fancy car, going to a movie, going on vacation with your family, going to a sporting event, eating food that you like, fun and leisure. And when we think about how good a job money does of meeting these 5 needs, money does an absolutely fantastic job of meeting this need. If you want to have fun or you want to relax, money is really fantastic for that. I won't keep you. Money is really great at that. But let's look at the other 4 facets of human flourishing. The second is engagement, or doing deep, meaningful work. We are a species who needs to get our hands dirty. We need to work. We need to be doing something. And work, most people don't think of this. Most people think of leisure and fun first, but work is a part of a happy life. The third is the one that is most predictive. If you could only maximize for one of these variables, this is the one you want. This is relationships. Are we giving love? Are we receiving love? That's the single best predictor of a happy life. Are the people in our tribe, are they well taken care of, and do they love us, and do they feel our love? The fourth is meaning, working for something bigger than yourself, being part of a cause, being part of a team, worshiping God, spirituality, philanthropy, community involvement. This is meaning. And then finally, advancement or growth. The human family does not want to tread water. We want to be better, today than we were yesterday, and we need evidence of that growth and that ascension. Now, when you look at these 5 things, once we get past positive emotion, money isn't as one-to-one powerful in predicting our ability to do these things. And a lot of times people over-optimize or over-index on the things that money can buy and ignore the things that money can't buy. In putting together the research for the book, I found that recent retirees are among the most depressed people in the US, which is a very, very sad statistic, a very sad finding for me, because you have these people who have spent their life preparing for the financial aspects of retirement, But work actually meets a lot of these needs. Work gives us engagement. Work surrounds us with people. Work makes us part of a team that's working for something bigger, and work gives us opportunities to measure our growth and progress. So when you're planning with the Vantage Point friends here, when you're planning with them for your retirement, optimize, yes, of course, for wealth creation, so you can do all the fun, lovely things that you want to do, but also make sure you have a plan in place for serving, for growing, and for loving, and doing the other things that make life truly worth living. Tim talked a lot in his opening remarks about purpose. And purpose, if I just had to pick one word that sort of defines my purpose, it would be helping others find theirs. And in this pursuit, my hero, my professional hero, is a man named Viktor Frankl. And probably many of you have read his book, Man's Search for Meaning. And if you haven't read his book, Man's Search for Meaning, I absolutely recommend it to you. Frankl was, of course, a Holocaust survivor, and his great insight from having survived Auschwitz and a number of other camps was that he or she who has a why to live can bear with almost any how. So he or she who has a why to live can bear with almost any how. What does that mean in plain English? It means if you have a purpose, it will see you through the hard times. This is true of lofty things, like the sort of things that Frankl survived, but it's also true of our money. And there's some fascinating research about pairing money with meaning. Morningstar found that people in goals-based retirement accounts, these are people who have labeled their accounts, just the simple act of saying, Daniel's retired to the Philippines fund instead of, Crosby fund ABC 123. People who named their funds with a purpose had a 15% increase in wealth relative to those who didn't. Well, what would account for that? Well, here's one of the things. They were much less likely to freak out when markets got choppy. They were much less likely to panic sell when markets got choppy, 10x less likely to go to cash in a volatile market because they were anchored in that purpose. Now, the Vantage Point folks said some lovely things about my family. I love them. I miss them. They're upstairs playing games. I'll join them here shortly. But here they are. Here's my beautiful family. Here's me before I lost a bunch of weight. So shout out to protein and regular exercise. But this is my family. This is my why. They are my purpose. And I show them to you here to introduce some research that's maybe my favorite research ever done. They compared a control group to a group of people who looked at a picture of their family for 5 seconds before logging into their bank accounts. And they found that over time, the people who had a picture of their family pop up when they logged into their bank accounts made dramatically better saving, investing, and spending decisions than those who didn't. They saved twice as much as the control group, which is an absolutely incredible finding for 5 seconds of looking at your wife and kids. So why did they do this again? Well, all the stuff that Vantage Point asks you to do with your money is hard. It's hard to take risk. It's hard to set aside money that could buy you cool stuff today and invest it and save it for a tomorrow that can seem a little hazy sometimes. Everything that our advisors ask us to do is tough. It's psychologically tough. We know that. And one of the ways that we can find the wherewithal or the grit to do that is to root ourselves in our purpose and our values. The last thing that I'll say here, we got the Winter Olympics, which are by far the cooler Olympics to me. One man's opinion. We got the Winter Olympics coming up in just a couple of days here, and the hype is incredibly high at the Crosby household. So let's talk about one of the greatest Olympians of all time, Michael Phelps. And one of the things that he did to become so great at his craft, we can actually learn from as well. And this is visualization. If you go back and watch those Phelps Olympic races, he always did the same thing before a race. He would close his eyes and sort of visually map his way through the course, anticipating highs, lows, mistakes, advantages, and he would visualize this success. The research around this for all of you as you prepare for retirement is absolutely incredible. People who had a visceral, vivid, visual understanding of what their retirement would look like saved a dramatically higher number, 73% more than a control group. Because again, I'm in my mid 40s. I'm 46. The idea of 66-year-old Daniel can seem pretty remote. Now, it seems less and less remote the grayer I get. It's coming into sharper and sharper relief. But the idea of a 66-year-old me can feel a little bit remote. And so one of the things that we can do with our advisor is to get very specific about what we want our lives to look like. Not just, I want to retire to the mountains. Which mountain? You want to go to Park City. Okay. Which slope? Where's the house going to sit? Where are the grandkids going to sip hot chocolate? Where are you going snowshoeing? We have a mandate to get very visual and very specific because it helps us save as we're able to better envision our future selves. Next, I want to talk about the saddest story in the book. The saddest story, there's a couple. This is definitely up there, though. The saddest story in the book is the story, of course, of the great artist Van Gogh. And we all know that in addition to his great talent, Van Gogh was famous for being for cutting his ear off and eventually taking his life. And when we look at why he did that, what we know now is that the most likely reason he did that was that he was very jealous of his frenemy, Paul Gauguin. Gauguin was, of course, a talented and to this day a well-renowned and respected artist, but Gauguin was much more commercially successful than Van Gogh. Van Gogh, we only have a hard record of Van Gogh ever selling one single painting in his lifetime, which is absolutely wild when you think about what they're worth now. But Van Gogh was not very successful, and he wrote many letters to his brother, who was his benefactor, bemoaning the fact that he was not as successful as Gauguin and comparing his gifts and his commercial success or lack of success to his friend and rival. Eventually, this drove him mad, and he did the things that he did. And it's not just starving artists that are driven mad by playing the comparison game. I'm not going to share every statistic here for time. I want to draw your attention to that one in bold there. This was a very robust study of millions of people, and it found that perceived relative wealth is a better predictor of happiness than objective wealth. So what does that mean? Again, in not shrink speak, it means that your reference class is a better predictor of how happy you will be with your financial life than your actual financial life. There are people in the 95th percentile for wealth in the world who are miserable because they are benchmarking themselves to people in the 99th percentile of wealth in the world. And there are other people in the 40th percentile of wealth in the world who are happy as they can be because they are running their own race. We find again and again and again, when wealth is pursued for comparative purposes to try and show off or one up or prove something, it makes us absolutely miserable. And we have over 300 studies that show this. You know, we're all familiar with the term keeping up with the Joneses. I won't I won't spoil it for you. I go into the etymology of that term in the book, and I'll let you read it there. But we now have over 300 studies showing that people who undertake wealth creation for comparative or one-upsmanship type purposes are driven absolutely batty by this, and that instead the people who have an abundance mentality are the ones who focus on growth and community and self-betterment, right? There is nothing wrong with wanting to build wealth. But if you are building that wealth to be generous or to bless the lives of people in your community rather than to show off for your neighbor, it's a very, very different equation. The final thing that I'll say about this is if you find yourself caught up in this comparison trap, which, by the way, is nothing to be ashamed of. This is a deeply human thing. It's something I do. It's something we're all prone to. If you find yourself susceptible to this trap, one of the best things that we can do that is a comparison killer is to show gratitude. And in the book, I talk about two very specific instances, or just two very specific ways that we can show gratitude. One is quite easy. One is writing in a journal every day one thing you're grateful for. In my home, we've decided to do this a little bit of a different way. We used to ask our kids, I have a kid in high school and middle school and elementary school. So it's a real adventure at my house. And so, we would ask the kids, how was school? And they would go, like, fine. And so now we will say, what was the best thing that happened to you today? And this is a form of gratitude, simply enumerating that one good thing that happened to you today, whether in a prayer, whether around the dinner table, whether in a gratitude journal. This led to a 10% increase in happiness, which is incredible. I mean, that's incredibly high. The other thing that I thought was cool that I actually did when I came across the research, I found this and then I did it for myself so I wouldn't be a hypocrite, is writing a letter to someone who has blessed your life. Writing a letter to someone who has done something kind for you, and in particular, may not have known what a big deal that was to you. So writing them that letter and say, hey, when you did ABC thing, that really meant a lot to me. And I'm not sure I ever said thank you, or I'm not sure what a big deal that was. And I can tell you, the research showed that this was good for 1 month of happiness boosts. And I can tell you that when I did it, it was pretty special. It was pretty neat. And people are not expecting to get a letter like that. I'm not going to tell you the story of the Great Gatsby. I talk about it in the book and talk about how it's kind of the great American novel and how it speaks to the ways in which wealth can be empty if we don't employ it in the correct ways. And so now I want to take a moment to talk about money and happiness. The research on money and happiness is really fascinating. A few years ago, a study came out that showed that money and happiness were tightly correlated up to $75,000 a year in income, which would now be about $100,000. So call it $100,000 in income. The relationship between money and happiness was positive. The more money you had, the happier you were. But at $100,000, it really plateaued pretty hard and sort of flatlined there. That was a curious finding, and when we look into it, it really had a lot to do with how they measured happiness, because the way that they were measuring happiness had a strong physical sort of pain component to it, like the absence of pain was happiness. And it turns out that, yes, sure enough, money is good at keeping you full and dry and warm, and all of these things are contributors to happiness. But that's not all that happiness entails. And so more recent research has shown that subjective well-being, which is just sort of saying, hey, Nick, hey, Jeremy, how you doing? How do you feel? And them describing that to me, the relationship between money and happiness is positive up to about $500,000 in income. So money can, we know from the research that money can sort of buy us the absence of misery, right? It can keep us from being hungry or cold or sick oftentimes. But what we also see is that for about 15% of people, they're not ever happy. They're not happy at any level of income. And so they have a very different problem. And it's one that sort of an itch that money can't scratch. So what do we know about money, right? The absence of money makes us miserable. Some level of money makes us happy, but we also know that money can't sort of buy us the best things in life. So what do we know from the research about how we can spend our money in ways that bring us as much happiness as possible? Well, one thing we know is to spend on experiences. This is very, very consistent. And the reason why is that we as a human family engage in something called rosy retrospection. When I take my family to Disney World, in the moment, right? I'm getting sunburned, I'm spending too much money, I'm thirsty, I'm bored in this long line for teacups. It's not all wine and roses sort of in the moment. But when I look back on that time with my children, I remember it very fondly. And then by that time next year, I forget and I take them all over again. And I'm like, wow, this is expensive. Like, this is expensive and hot and uncomfortable. And then I forget and rinse and repeat, right? Rosy retrospection, our memory of experiences gets better, but things tend to get worse. There's entropy, there's decay, stuff breaks, stuff gets rusty, stuff gets old, stuff gets outdated. Things get worse, memories get better. We're going to talk about this in a minute, but giving money away, blessing the lives of others is a big one. Another one that I think we miss a lot is buying our time back. And what this looks like is getting out of work that you hate. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. You may have heard it's hot here in the summer. I have a very big yard. One of the best uses of my money every summer is to pay a high school kid to mow my lawn while I drink Diet Coke on the back porch and laugh at them. Right. No, I'm not that mean. But this is one of the best uses of my money, is just getting out of that work that I really dislike and allowing me to buy back some of my time. So don't feel the need to apologize. If you have the money to get yourself out of cleaning a house, cleaning a toilet, mowing a yard, grocery shopping, whatever it is you dislike, by all means, buy that happiness back. The most interesting piece of this that I want to share with you, though, is around car clubs and retirees. In general, when people have a financial windfall, buying a car is one of the bucket list, sort of top of the list items for people who have come into some money. Not a big surprise. But what we find in the research is that buying a car doesn't usually buy that much happiness at all. In fact, cars are really expensive. They depreciate rapidly. They take maintenance and care. They're kind of a pain. So buying a car tends to not be a good way to spend money unless you join a car club. People who buy a whatever Porsche to join the Porsche Society of Northern Atlanta, these people see an immediate and a persistent uptick in their happiness, because what they have effectively done is they have bought themselves some friends. They have bought themselves those relationships of people who are like-minded, who share an interest. They can get together with them on Saturday. They can hang out with them on the weekends. They can go be gearheads and talk shop together. And this actually does buy them a lot of happiness. So anything you can do to buy an experience or to strengthen a relationship is going to be a way that you can spend money in ways that are going to bring you a lot of happiness. All right. So when I was writing the book, I promised I would talk about giving a little bit here. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about giving, I wanted to write a book that was evergreen. I wanted to write a book that you could read 100 years from now and the ideas and the philosophies would all stand up. And so I looked for places where there was broad agreement. And across every faith and philosophical tradition, across every race and culture and language and corner of the world, there is this idea that the more you give away, the more will return to you. And from a strictly capitalist mathematical perspective, that doesn't make sense, right? That math doesn't make sense. It seems like you would be decreased by whatever you give away. And yet that is not the case. We know from the research, the idea of wealthy, right? The idea of wealthy is really a subjective idea because, the most lower middle class person living today lives a life of comfort and ease and affluence that would have been foreign to kings, hundreds of years ago, right? So wealth is sort of this relative thing. It's this subjective thing. But what we find is there are two great predictors of whether or not someone feels content with their wealth. The first of these is very practical. It's how much money do they have in the bank? Of course, your level of wealth has something to do with how financially contented you feel. The second one, though, is how much money do you give away? This one is fascinating to me because there are, again, people at the 95th percentile for wealth who are wealthy by any objective standard, but do not feel wealthy because they are not generous. So generosity, I would suggest to you, is a part of wealth. And having, a lot of commas in your bank account is not the only thing that makes someone wealthy if they are stingy with that wealth. For the sake of time, I'm going to actually fast forward to my last point here. And one of the things that I wanted to do, I hope when you all read the book, you'll enjoy the little historical anecdotes within. I had a good time digging them up, and I wanted to make sure sometimes when you're digging up historical anecdotes, women have not always been as well represented in history as we might have liked. And so I wanted to make sure I was including women's stories and telling women's stories and shining a light on some extraordinary women whose stories people may not have heard before. And one of these women was Mary Anning. And Mary Anning grew up in Britain a couple hundred years ago. And she, when she was 12 years old, discovered an intact ichthyosaur skeleton. Now, to put this in perspective, George Washington never heard of a dinosaur. George Washington never knew dinosaurs existed. So there was no such thing as a paleontologist, and trying to make sense of fossilized remains was in its infancy. But Mary Anning discovers this intact, water creature from a young age and sets about blazing a trail to figure out what this thing is and what it's all about. So even though educational opportunities were limited for women, she blazed a trail. Even though paleontology as a discipline wasn't really a thing, she blazed a trail. She didn't wait for life to come to her. She blazed a trail. And, I think the Vantage Point friends can can empathize that when someone hears that I work in finance, typically, like on an airplane, if someone asks me what I do, usually I'll tell them I'm a psychologist, but then sometimes they want free therapy. And so, sometimes if I want to be left alone, I'll tell them I work in finance. And so when you tell someone you work in finance, a lot of times the questions you get are, what's the market going to do? Which stock should I pick? What's the president going to do? What's going to happen with the virus? Or, sort of whatever is happening geopolitically or economically at the moment. And I understand why people want to know those things. But the research is unequivocal that the best predictor of your eventual wealth creation is not you figuring out the next rate move from Jerome Powell, or not you timing the next tweet from Trump, or predicting who wins the next prime minister of Britain, or whatever, who starts the next war. These things are unknowable and unforecastable and outside your power. But so much of wealth creation is in your power. The best predictor of whether or not you reach your financial goals is your behavior. It's, are you patient? Are you long-term? Are you prudent? Do you listen to the great advice you're getting from Vantage Point, right? The best predictor of the engine of your wealth, right? Your ability to save is your years of schooling. So do you need to go get a certificate? Do you need to go back to school? Have you done all you can to crank, to stoke that engine of your wealth? But there's more. People who exercise make more money than those who don't, because the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And there are positive spillover effects from things like exercise and eating well. I absolutely loved this finding. People who go to therapy make dramatically more than people who don't. 10% on average. It's even more for men, because perhaps men are more troubled. But you think about the world that we live in, the offices that we work in, the workplaces that we find ourselves in. Most of us are not making widgets. Most of us are interacting with other people and managing stress and making decisions. And something like going to therapy, finding a mentor, having a coach, all of these things make us better at those things. So the next time you feel inclined to try to anticipate a rate hike or to predict, the next hot stock, realize that the power is within you to do the things that are most predictive of your eventual wealth creation. And it's none of those externalities. It's making yourself a better version of yourself. In closing, thank you all for being here. Thank you for spending your dinner hour with me. I want to close with a wonderful quote from my hero, Viktor Frankl, who said that evermore today, people have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. The people on this call are some of the wealthiest people who have ever lived, just statistically speaking. I know you maybe don't feel rich, but if we look back at the history of the world, the level of affluence and abundance and security that we enjoy today is really unprecedented. So let's take that. Let's use the lessons from the Soul of Wealth, and let's transform that material wealth into the kind of wealth that Tim and the brothers were talking about at the outset here. And let's turn that material wealth into human wealth, personal wealth. Let's turn it into love and goodness and kindness and make a difference in the world and in our own lives. It's my hope that you've taken one or two things tonight from this that'll help you do just that. And I thank you again for your time.
Virtual round of applause for Daniel. Thank you so much. For those of you, something we forgot to mention at the beginning, for those of you who joined us today and stuck with us to the end, we do have copies of Daniel's book, The Soul of Wealth, to send to all of you. So our team will be in touch with you to make sure we have your addresses. It is a wonderful book. I love it. And just like Daniel said, one of my biggest urges for all of you before we go to our Q&A session, one of my biggest urges is to write down one thing. If you haven't already, write down one thing that you intend on implementing, a mindset, a decision, a key takeaway, something even maybe you want to share with a friend. That's the best way to keep this conversation going and to spark a fire in the other people that you love and care for. So thank you, Daniel. Thank you for spreading this message. It means the world to us.